Hello, U.S. history students, and welcome to our lesson on Gettysburg. Now, before we get started with this battle, I do have to apologize about the previous lesson on Civil War people. The Civil War is probably my favorite topic to discuss in American history because this is the great test if this democracy that we have formed since the American Revolution isn't going to work. And I just find the people involved in the events and everything like that interesting. I read up a lot about it. I have all of these facts and things like that, all these stories that I want to share with you guys. And as a result, the lessons often go off on tangents and get a little bit wordy. So I apologize for that with the lessons on Civil War people. I'm going to apologize for that again with this lesson on the Battle of Gettysburg, because the Battle of Gettysburg is my favorite battle of the American Civil War. I love studying and I love reading about it, and I know a lot of stories and everything like that. So I apologize again. I will try to be brief, and we will try to hit the high points as we move through this lesson. Now, please use the notes that I've given you to keep details or to take details about the lesson down on, and then use those notes to study for a little quiz on this. Okay, so we have two sides: the North, the Union, versus the South, the Confederacy. Okay, as we move into Gettysburg, and we talked about this, we talked about it on the last lesson. The South is under the leadership of General Lee, Robert E. Lee. Now, the state of Virginia and the standardized SOLs requires me to tell you that Lee marches into Gettysburg, which is in Pennsylvania, in order to get shoes from a warehouse in town. Okay, the state of Virginia requires me to tell you that. So, on a standardized test, if you ever see this question, which Civil War battle was fought because of shoes, you will put down the Battle of Gettysburg, okay, because that's what you need to do. The state of Virginia requires me to tell that to you. However, that is completely wrong, okay? What ends up happening, in all honesty, is that Lee decides to invade the North for a second time. He's done it before when he invaded Maryland with the Battle of Antietam. He wants to go further north, somewhere in Pennsylvania, probably Philadelphia, maybe Harrisburg, okay? Maybe even up as far as New York and New York, okay? To put pressure on the Northern government to surrender. He sends out one of his subordinate generals, General Heath, to do some scouting. And Heath ends up in Gettysburg, where he hears tell that there are some Union soldiers there. Heath assumes that he will show up, and it's not supposed to be a lot of Union soldiers. Heath assumes that he will show up and he will scare the Union soldiers and push them out of the town, and he will look good in front of his commanding officer, Robert E. Lee. Okay. When Heath shows up, he instead encounters the dismounted cavalry of General John Buford. This is a crack, top-notch cavalry outfit. They have repeating rifles, rapid fire versus the muskets and things that the normal army is using. And all of a sudden, battle is commenced. All right. But Lee and Meade did not anticipate, Meade being Northern general, Lee and Meade did not anticipate fighting at this little town in Pennsylvania. To be honest with you, Lee probably had a lot of supplies. He had been victorious at the Battle of Chancellorsville in May of 1863 and the Battle of Fredericksburg in December 1862. So if his army needed shoes, they'd already got them. Okay. Not saying that Heath wasn't looking for some supplies, but he was really looking more at engaging some Union soldiers and making himself look good in front of Robert E. Lee. So in all honesty, the fact that we were fighting in Gettysburg here is kind of by mistake. Neither army wanted to get here. All right. So the South is under the leadership of General Lee. They are marching toward Gettysburg. All right. General Meade, and that is Meade on the left right there. General Meade is the leader of the Union troops. He commands the Army of the Potomac. Meade has gotten word that Lee's headed toward Gettysburg. He is moving his troops to that position as well. Okay, so like I say, it's kind of by mistake that both these armies end up in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. Okay. Now, the reason we take a day and talk about Gettysburg is many historians consider Gettysburg to be the turning point of the war in the East. Now, this is up for debate because the war is going to go on for 2 more years after this battle, all right? But many historians consider this the turning point. It is an official Union victory, okay? In fact, it is probably one of the biggest official Union victories in the Eastern Theater. Lee will never again attempt to invade the North. The war will continue down in the South. Now, it doesn't end overnight, but the beginning of the end starts here at Gettysburg. Okay, so that's why we take a day. The Battle of Gettysburg is going to be one of the turning points of the Civil War, and specifically the Civil War in the East. Now, the state of Virginia tells me that the Battle of Gettysburg lasted for 4 days, from July 1st to July 4th, 1863. The state of Virginia wants you to know that the Battle of Gettysburg lasted from July 1st to July 4th, 1863. So, if you have a standardized test question that asks you which Civil War battle lasted from July 1st to July 4th, 1863, you will put down the Battle of Gettysburg. Once again, this is not correct, okay? The battle lasts from July 1st to July 3rd, 1863. There is no fighting on July 4th. On July 4th, Lee begins his retreat back to Virginia, okay? So the battle actually lasts 3 days, July 1st through 3rd, 1863. On July 4th, Lee begins his retreat back into Virginia. All right, now real quickly, let's go through the 3-day battle here. Day 1, July 1st. Lee initially is winning, okay? So on July 1st, Heath comes into contact with the dismounted cavalry of John Buford. Early in the morning, the Union is winning, okay? They are pushing back the Confederate forces, but Lee gets more troops on the field quicker, and those troops begin to push the Union Army past what is called Seminary Ridge through the town of Gettysburg. Okay, Lee pushes the Union Army back into Gettysburg, and eventually through Gettysburg to the hills on the other side of the town where the Union is able to dig in. Okay, and if we could go there, you would see that the Union had a pretty good position at the beginning of the battle on Seminary Ridge. They get pushed off of Seminary Ridge back through Gettysburg, and they end up in an even better position on the other side of town on something called Cemetery Hill. Okay. And we've talked about it before. In battle, you want to be at the top of the high ground so you can defend it. You want your enemy at the bottom, and that's exactly what happens. Okay, the Union gets pushed through the town of Gettysburg to the high ground on the other side, and they begin to dig in. Okay, on day 2, Lee continues to send in troops. The Union Army stretches from one end of Cemetery Hill to the other. It kind of looks like a fish hook. And Lee sends in more troops. He's going to probe the sides of the Union line. He attacks the flanks like the extreme left and the extreme right. And there is brutal fighting on both of those fronts, but he can never break the Union line. Okay, he can never break the Union line. And at the end of July 2nd, the Union Army is pretty much in the same position at the end of the day that it was at the beginning. Okay, in fact, it gets reinforced by Union troops that are continuing to arrive in Gettysburg. Okay, so Lee continues the attack on July 2nd. At the end of the day, the Union line still holds. It's in basically the same position, and it's being reinforced by new troops that have just shown up, which is going to lead us to day 3 and kind of the climactic battle, or the climactic maneuver of this battle is charge. Okay, 14,000 Confederates will charge over a open field about a mile long toward the center of the Union line. Okay, Lee begins the morning by attacking on the sides again. But what he assumes is that the Union Army has reinforced the sides and it's weaker in the center. Okay, what he doesn't know is Meade has put reinforcements all up and down the Union line. So this is a strong position that Lee is going to attack. So he begins by attacking the ends, but then the main part of the thrust is going to be right at the center. Okay. Now, if you go to Gettysburg, the field of Pickett's charge looks flat, but when you get out there, you realize it goes up and down. Okay. So there is a part of the field when you get down and you look across to where the Union Army was, and you realize, hey, I can't see them. All right. That would be great if you could stop there, but you can't. Okay. You got to keep going because the line is further out. Okay. So 14,000 Confederates step off over this open field. Okay. One of Lee's subordinates, General Pickett, Lee tells Pickett after the attack, because the attack gets just decimated because you're crossing open fields. Okay. So the attack gets totally decimated. And Pickett and the remnants of his troops begin to retreat and begin to fall back to where Lee is on the Confederate side. And Lee orders Pickett to reform his division. Pickett replies to Lee, General Lee, sir, I have no division. Okay, now I won't bore you with numbers and things like that, but what Pickett in essence is saying is I don't have enough troops to constitute a division. I lost a lot of soldiers. I don't have enough. I don't have the numbers to reconstitute a division. Okay. So this is a major defeat for Lee's army. Okay. He is not able to push the Union off of their positions. He tried attacking on the sides. That didn't work. He tried attacking at the center. That didn't work. And now he has all these casualties. And like we talked about in the people lesson, Meade has casualties too, but the North can replace those numbers. Lee can't. Okay. When he loses a man, he loses a man. All right. So on July 4th, realizing that he has been defeated, Lee is going to retreat out of Pennsylvania, out of Gettysburg, back into Virginia. Okay. He leaves the battlefield and heads south. Meade is going to be criticized because he does not follow Lee, okay? And chances are if he had followed Lee, he might have been able to end the war there after the Battle of Gettysburg. But to be honest with you, both sides are very, very tired. I can't fault Meade for not pursuing Lee. Also, Meade had just received command of the Army of the Potomac in late June, right before the Gettysburg campaign. So he is relatively new to command, and I can't fault him for pursuing Lee, okay? Plus, the next day, on July the 4th, not only does Lincoln receive word that Lee has been defeated at Gettysburg and is headed back south, but also he's going to hear that General Grant has defeated the Confederacy at Vicksburg in Mississippi. So July 4th, 1863 is a big day for Lincoln. 2 major victories for the Union Army, okay? And now the focus becomes, let's head to Richmond and wrap this thing up. Okay. So that's the battle in a real quick nutshell. All right. More Americans are going to die in the 4 days or 3 days at the Battle of Gettysburg than in the entire Vietnam War. Okay. A total of 51,000 lives are going to be lost at Gettysburg. Okay, and 600,000 are going to be lost in the course of the Civil War. This is the bloodiest battle of the war. Antietam is the bloodiest single day of the war. Gettysburg is the bloodiest battle because it lasts for 3 days. Now, you've got all these casualties laying on the fields in Gettysburg, and that's a whole separate story, is the burial and recovery of the bodies, okay? The Confederates are going to be basically buried where they fell. And it's going to be after the war that the South has enough money to begin to exhume those bodies and try to bring them back to their families. The North, though, decides that they would like to create a cemetery at Gettysburg for the dead. They want to create a national cemetery. And they begin to exhume bodies, and they take a part of the town cemetery, which is called Evergreen Cemetery, and they're going to transform it into a national cemetery for all the Civil War dead. Okay, especially, well, let me take that back. All the Civil War dead at Gettysburg. By November 1863, so the battle's in July 1863. By November 1863, they are ready to dedicate this new cemetery. Okay, so we're going to fast forward to November 1863, 4 months after the battle. And a group of Northerners, Northern dignitaries, come to Gettysburg to dedicate this new national cemetery for the dead, for the soldiers. And at the last minute, they're going to have a presentation. They're going to have a speaker. The main speaker is a guy by the name of Edward Everett. Okay, he was an orator of the day. That was his job, was to give speeches. Okay, so he was going to come and give this grand speech. He was going to review the battle, review the war, and things like that, and kind of dedicate this cemetery. And at the last minute, somebody says, "Hey, you know who we ought to invite? Is we ought to invite the president. Let's see if President Lincoln will come." And Lincoln agrees. Lincoln comes. Okay, November the 18th is the dedication day. So Lincoln shows up. November the 19th. Okay, Lincoln shows up on the 18th, and the cemetery is going to be dedicated on the 19th. So Lincoln shows up November 18th. He's going to speak on November the 19th. I told you Edward Everett was there. Edward Everett gets up and gives like a 2-hour speech. Okay. And then he sits down, and then comes the president. And everybody kind of settles back down, and they're going to wait to see what Lincoln says. Lincoln is going to speak for 2 minutes. And those 2 minutes are probably going to be one of the most famous speeches in American history. It's one of my favorite speeches from American history, and we know it today as the Gettysburg Address. Now, Lincoln thought the speech was a failure. He was getting up to speak, and the photographer was there. The photographer was going to take his picture giving this great speech, and by the time the photographer got his camera set up, Lincoln had already sat back down. There wasn't a lot of applause because I think people thought he was going to go on for longer. The reviews in the paper were not good. But Edward Everett said, "I hope in 2 hours that I was able to accomplish what you accomplished in 2 minutes." He knew it was a good speech. And history, like I said, remembers it as probably one of the greatest speeches in Lincoln's career, if not the history of the country. In those 2 minutes, Lincoln gives his view of America. Okay. And he starts off 7 years ago. Now, if you do the math, a score is 20. So 4 is 4 times 20 is 80. 7, 80 plus 7 is 87. If you do the math and you subtract 87 from 1863, the date, it becomes 1776. Well, what happened 7 years ago before this in 1776? The Declaration of Independence. So Lincoln is giving his view of America in 2 minutes, from the Declaration of Independence in 1776 to the Battle of Gettysburg, 1863. History will remember the Gettysburg Address as the speech given by Lincoln after the Battle of Gettysburg. Okay, that's kind of the definition. All right. In it, Lincoln says this war is a struggle to preserve a nation. 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition all men are created equal. So 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Okay, so the struggle that this war is about is to preserve that nation dedicated to this proposition. And when Lincoln talks about all men created equal, he is talking about these slaves. Okay, we are going to realize what our founding fathers wanted, a nation where everybody is equal. And he says, we're now engaged in this great civil war, testing whether or not that nation or any nation so conceived can long endure. And he goes on and he ends the speech with this great quote, okay, that government of the people, by the people, and for the people shall not perish from the earth. Okay? Once again, this statement from the American Revolution that the government is about the people. Think about the Constitution. Now, I know it comes after the Revolution, but the Constitution, we the people. Okay? Lincoln is saying this struggle, which this battle has been a part of, is to preserve that nation, to realize the desire that everybody is equal, and to preserve this government of the people, by the people, and for the people. Okay? He says America is one nation, not a collection of sovereign states. He goes back to the whole reason he fought this war to begin with, to preserve the country. Okay? And that's something that he's always said throughout the war. He does not really acknowledge the Confederacy. He sees the Confederacy as children that have gotten angry and have kind of stormed off and are pouting in their room. Someday they will come back, okay? At some point in time, they will come back. They don't leave the family just because they're angry, all right? That's the way he sees it. We are one nation, not a collection of sovereign states. And even though we're at war, someday those children are going to come back. When you look at the Gettysburg Address, you get the feeling that the Civil War is the second American Revolution. And Lincoln wants it to fulfill the promise of Thomas Jefferson in the Declaration of Independence, where we have a new birth of freedom, where all men are created equal. So that's, to me, why it is one of the most powerful speeches in the history of the country. It's why I think it's one of Lincoln's most powerful speeches, is he's painting this picture. This is why we've been fighting this war, to preserve this nation that has existed since the American Revolution. And by God, when it's over, the government will be there. Everybody will be back. We are one nation, and we are going to realize this desire that all men are created equal. We're going to free the slaves. Okay, so he's going to pick, we talk about the Emancipation Proclamation. We're coming full circle. Okay, it's not just about preserving the Union anymore. It's about making a people free.